Hey guys, so it is after Thanksgiving and we can now legally talk about Christmas-themed books. I will be discussing the ones that I've read so far based on the order that I read them. And first up is Walking in a Witchy Wonderland by Juliet Cross. This is technically part of her Stay a Spell series, and it's basically several holiday stories involving the primary and secondary characters from the Stay a Spell series. There is one or two of the Savoy sisters, and then a few that are of the secondary characters in the series. I definitely recommend this book for fans of the existing series because it covers a few plot points that were discussed in the released books but weren't really hashed out in detail, such as Charlie and JJ's story as well as Marcus and Tia's story. This makes me think that this entire series as a whole is really well plotted because the timeline of each story is from a different timeline within the released books. Basically, I think there are 6 stories in this book, and it all covers a different timeline. And I think that that's really a smart way of filling in the gaps that the readers didn't necessarily get to see in the released books. So yeah, I definitely recommend that. As is tradition with Juliet Cross, there are definitely graphic intimate scenes involved in the books. It started out very festive, so the festive scale was high up at the start, but then gradually it sort of traded it for more, steam. And I'm not mad at it at all. I think it's still a really interesting series, and like I said, it fills in the gap of all those details that are missing that fans of the series might want to see. The second one is Window Shopping by Tessa Bailey, and wow, sis really found a gap in the market with the ex-con window dresser at a shopping center character. Writing that in as the main character, I think, is a really smart thing on Bailey's part because I have never seen that before. The story definitely has a whimsical quality to it. You feel like luck is on their side the whole time, to the point where you can almost scoff at how on point their instincts are. But given that it's a Christmas book, I can handle a little magic. I can get on board with the idea that Santa is hocus pocusing the out of this business. On the festive scale, since it's a shopping mall, the festive energy is there. Although it doesn't maintain it as strong throughout, it's still a really great story. The protagonist and her love interest Aiden, they have a Cindy Lou Grinch thing going on, and I really like that the author switched it up and made the guy the chirpy one, which is not often seen. Aiden was almost really childlike in his adoration for Stella, the main character, in that he saw her and he just didn't want to put her down from that point on, which I think is really sweet and really, I don't know, the holiday feels are there in his adoration for Stella. And I think he's a really great Prince Charming overall because I was waiting for the shoe to drop on his character the whole time, but he never did. He was just a great character all around, and it's a great story. It's about, like I said, an ex-con who is struggling to find work after getting out and then gets a job as a window dresser at a department store where she falls in love with a department store owner. That's all I'm going to say about it. Read it. It's really great, really funny, and since it's Tessa Bailey, there is obviously a lot of intimate scenes, but I don't know, I think it's festive and nice. Okay, so next up is Dear Santa. It's about a girl who goes back home for the holidays and then reconnects with an old classmate. And the writing on this is very formal. It almost has a wistful quality to it, as if it could have started with Once Upon a Time. The raw emotion on other romances seem a bit absent here. And It's not a POV, which it's not like a first person POV, which I found harder to relate to, just with this particular story. And intimacy wise, none of the intimate scenes were discussed in detail, like explicitly. So I don't really want to label it as like clean or dirty or whatever. But yeah, the intimate scenes were not discussed in detail beyond kissing. Christmas vibes wise, the Christmas vibes were definitely there in that it was a small town and, you know, there's a lot of Santa magic going on. But romance-wise, it was a bit lacking. Lindy, the main character, she was a bit cerebral in her romance with Billy, in that she was discussing she was thinking about the logistical implications of her romance with Billy, which I understand is a very adult way of approaching things. It struck me as very cerebral. She was considering like living arrangements and the changes in her work in case they got together. Billy, as Prince Charming, was a bit stiff in how he like expressed his affections for Lindy, which I found a bit lacking. He had his moments, but they were few and far between. If you're looking for a romance that does not discuss the intimate scenes in detail, this one might be for you. Next up is Duke, actually. This is the second book of a series. That was my first mistake. I read this first before finding out that there was a first book, and so I was thrown off by the info dumping at the beginning of this one. The story of the first book is there's a princess and she falls in love with a cab driver, and this one is about the ex-fiance of the princess and the best friend of the cab driver. Awesomely put. And they have to attend the wedding. Yeah. So basically that's the plot of it. They met, the two main characters, Max and Danny, they met before the start of the book, which I think is a really useful device for quickly progressing the events of the book. This book covers 3 Christmases, which I think is a very long time to cover in any kind of book, holiday or otherwise, but it kind of worked. It was slow-paced at first, and then the excitement sort of builds. This was written really smart. It was on the edge of stiff and sarcastic. It had that kind of humor that may go over the heads of lesser humans. The events of this book were highly intertwined with the events of the first book, but Max and Danny eventually did show signs of independent identity away from the first book. This story had a very long-distance relationship type of romance, which I have not seen before in other books that I've read. And given the treatment that the author did, I think it's really cleverly put. The amount of cheesy rom-com movie scenes that were replicated were insane, but as with any holiday books, you kind of forgive it because, you know, Santa magic. And I don't know, I kind of loved it. How do you sense being in love without using the word itself, love? I think this book illustrates it perfectly. I'm gonna read a line off of it. Of course, this is, you know, by the author. He was so happy to be there, in the sun, in the ocean, in this moment, in what felt like grace. Isn't that beautiful? I think that's so great. The slow burn romance on this is delicious. There was nothing abrupt about it. The realizations that they felt happened in little shifts, and I think it was perfect. It's slow burn romances can often get boring to me, but this just did it right. I think the excitement built, as I said before. The characters of this story were so layered. They not only tried to analyze each other by way of analyzing what they said to each other, but they also tried to understand the motivations of one another in what they were saying. Like how Danny could sense when Max was trying to deflect issues off of himself by focusing on what she had going on in her life, or when he was trying to save someone from embarrassment. I think that's a very sophisticated way of, falling in love. The minor circumstances they were involved in, or that was written into their characters, their situations, such as Max's parent situation, and at the same time Danny's tenure or her situation at the university. I think it added so much to their characters as well. And yeah, I recommend this book. This book is at the top of my holiday reading list so far. Next, we have Flora's Traveling Christmas Shop. First of all, the cover. Can we talk about that? Who designed this? It's insane. I love this cover. And this is about a girl who's getting shat on by life, so she upends her entire life and gets a van and gets the out of there. She reroutes her whole life and lives according to a Hallmark movie. How awesome is that? And I think this is the most Christmassy book out of all that I've read. Right from the off, Flora is a bit intense for an English woman. She had this line of like, I'm so glad I have this job at Deck the Hall's Christmas shop or whatever as an assistant cashier. And I was like, bro, are you trolling me? She is such a cartoon and I loved her. Often in stories, the protagonist is usually this gem that's just waiting to be discovered, and finally we have a protagonist who is actually quirky, actually not for everyone, actually an acquired taste. I think that was so excellently put in this story. The character, how the character was written, Flora's character, was insane. It was so on point, and she had this giddiness about her, about Christmas, which sometimes would make you kind of laugh because it was just so over the top, but it worked, and I loved her. She took it all in stride. She lost her job, she got dumped by her boyfriend and all that, and then she still had courage to find a positive disposition in all that. And then she moves to Santaland and sells Christmas toys, Christmas decorations, which I think is, how Christmas can that get? It was like Christmas on steroids. She was like SpongeBob Christmas edition. And I think that was just so insane that the author took it there. Christmas-wise, definitely read it. I totally recommend it for the Christmas vibes. But romance-wise, it was a bit lacking. For me, the gem of the story is the journey of Flora in improving her life. Romance-wise, it felt a bit lacking. As a Prince Charming, I wanted a little more from Connor. The ending of the story was a bit abrupt. I felt that Connor lost his chance to redeem himself because the ending sort of came just like that. And yeah, I still enjoyed it. I like I said, it's the most Christmassy of everything that I've read. I definitely felt like that cozy vibe reading it. Also, the dialogue on this is so English, and I think it was charming. The British humor kind of takes a while to, kick in before you sort of get each punchline of all the humorous jokes in the story. But once you get it, you sort of are impressed by the level of sarcasm that British people have. I think to a certain extent, the story was kind of ridiculous, but given that they were self-aware and repeatedly said that they were trying to replicate this Hallmark movie sort of life, I kind of forgave everything. One more thing that I have for the story is that Flora's situation was really relatable. She had this line of, how late will I bloom? Because she was almost 30 and she could sort of not find this direction that she was looking for in life. And I think that's a very, very nice illustration of a particular situation in a person's life, you sort of feel like you're not alone when you read stuff like that, which means that it's happening to someone else out there. Next on the list is The Naughty, the Nice, and the Nanny by Willa Nash. And first of all, the guy's name is Holiday, and it sets the tone for the entire book. It's about this girl who ends up nannying for a hot rich single dad, and he happens to be an old classmate of hers. And this story is dual POV, which I think is a really good treatment for this particular concept. And it's a very fast, it's a sprint of a story. The Christmas spirit is definitely there in the limited settings and, small town feel. And the plot is straight to the point. And I think this is the definition of a whirlwind romance. They were in love in 2 days, together by the end of the week. And they were moved in 6 months and married and pregnant the following week. Which I think, it kind of works. It's a great, endearing story for the holidays. And I like that Maddox, the Prince Charming guy, he, as a single dad, thought of his daughter first in looking for his ideal woman. He wanted someone who would treat his daughter with kindness first and foremost, which I think is great. And yeah. It's great for holiday cozy reading. Lastly, we have The Christmas Wedding Guest, which was an easy read. It was cute and festive, but don't expect to be jumping out of your seats in excitement. This follows the story of 2 sisters and their respective Prince Charmings in a small town called Wishing Tree, where everyone is loaded. The approach of this book is very adult love. It's contemplative, considering factors beyond raw emotion, basically. Which is not to say that it isn't pure, but as adults, they could rein in their feelings and consider things like how that said partner would fit into their already established lives. Basically. That sounds pretty boring, but I swear it's festive. I think the story overall was charming in a very mundane, small town way. The people were routine inclined, which makes for a very slow-paced living, and it was well illustrated in the story. Romance-wise, I would have loved a bit more chemistry between the 4 primary characters, the Somerville sisters and Micah and Toby. The story kind of felt stalled until the punchline. It definitely paints a festive picture, but I don't think it needed to be 400 plus pages long. But festive vibes wise, definitely still read it. Definitely still Christmassy. Okay, so that is it for the festive books that I've read so far. I will definitely be reading more holiday themed books going forward, and I will let you know if I read anything interesting and worthwhile.